morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome back to another episode of Get Your Popcorn. So I'm recording this on Tuesday, March 4th, technically. So it's technically Happy Tuesday, but this will drop on Thursday. So here in Canada, we were just hit with the 25% tariffs from Donald Trump. So Donald Trump, if you're listening, fuck you. And to all my Canadian listeners out there, this is about to get real rough for us, so that fucking sucks. I'd like to encourage everyone to buy Canadian the best you can. I understand that there is an affordability crisis already going on in our country. So do what you can. If prices are similar to what you're buying, make sure you're trying to buy those Canadian goods. I know here where I'm living right now, the Western Family brand at Save on Foods, they've flagged their Canadian stuff, and it's a Canadian company. Try to be going to Canadian grocery stores, Superstore here, or anything under the Loblaws, which yes, they're price gouging for sure, but they're Canadian and their prices are often kind of on par to what Walmart is. So try to shop Canadian, try to shop as kind of local as you can within what you can afford in your budget, obviously. If that isn't something that's within your reason, then that's fine. But if you can afford to shop and make some of those swaps, make sure you're doing that. I have officially started not drinking Starbucks, which has been a big loss for me personally, trying to love Starbucks, but switching to those local coffee shops. Just make sure you're doing what you can. I know for me, when I'm comparing prices, I have a pretty strict grocery budget of about $200 a week for my family maximum. And I've been able to do that from switching to Walmart shopping to switching over to Save on Foods and Western Family stuff. Some key things that I found really helpful is buying the store brand. Lentils and beans really help stretch meat out best you can. Having a vegetarian meal or two in a week, and then meal planning everything that you can. I understand that not everybody's going to be able to do that with their time. Everybody's life is different. I'm just letting you know what's helped for me to be able to do a lot of those swaps. Another really helpful hack for saving some of those monies is buying frozen vegetables and fruit as opposed to fresh, because then you're not throwing stuff out. It lasts longer. That's helped really stretch our budget as well. So I just thought I can't not talk about that today, being that is just what's hit our country this morning. So again, fuck you, Trump, and the Republican Party. Fuck you guys. I would also I put a link in my Instagram bio. I'll make sure I put it in my TikTok bio and stuff today too for the Get Your Popcorn podcast. It's a link to the Red Cross donation for Ukraine. If that is something that you're able and wanting to do, I've linked it there for donation. It's just their specific page. It doesn't go through me or anything. I just have the link specifically to the Red Cross. The Ukrainian Russian war was not started by Ukraine, it was started by Russia, and standing behind Ukraine is standing behind democracy, and standing behind Ukraine's sovereignty is standing behind all of our sovereignty. Each one of us have a right to not be invaded by a foreign country. Foreign countries should not be able to just take over areas that they want. And let's not kid ourselves here in Canada that they're going to try and use the same rhetoric the United States as Putin's trying to use in the Ukraine. There's a lot of talk about 51st state stuff here. And there's a few people that I have seen, at least in my personal life, which was deeply upsetting, talking about how they support the idea of a 51st state and Donald Trump. And that's his way in here, guys. So stand behind your own country's sovereignty, stand behind the Ukraine. So there's the link in my bio, just that takes you directly to the Red Cross. That has nothing to do with me. So if you can donate, every little bit helps. Ukraine has a right to be its own nation. They fought hard for their freedom, and they've been fighting for 3 years officially in the war, but Crimea was annexed in 2014. So it's been a long road for them. And I know I don't have a very big platform at all, but I do want to use what little bit I have to do what I can. Okay, so of course I like to start off every one of these podcasts with a little bit of a political rant, because remember, art does not exist apolitically. Art is politics, and politics is art. This week we are doing Rear Window, so I have another classic movie for us. This is considered one of the best thriller movies of all time. It's done by, I think they call him the godfather of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. It stars Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly. And it was released in 1954. So this film's main star is Jimmy Stewart. He plays Jeff, who is a journalist who has all these adventures and is off traveling all over the world, taking these photographs, who has been injured and has broken his leg and is now confined to a wheelchair in his apartment. And it sort of is his exploration of kind of voyeurism by watching his neighbors in his little apartment complex through his window, just out of sheer boredom. This is long before you could scroll through TikTok for hours. Then we have Grace Kelly, who plays Lisa Fremont. She is sort of this model, aristocratic socialite. They live in New York. She's his girlfriend, his long-suffering girlfriend, who is in love with him and wants to settle down and get married. And he is very resistive to this because he doesn't want to give up his adventure for marriage. And he thinks that she is not the kind of gal who's going to go along with his life. We have Wendell Corey, who plays Lieutenant Thomas Doyle. He's referred to as Tom. He's an NYPD detective. He's a friend of Jeffers. We have Thelma Ritter, who plays Stella, who's the nurse that comes in to help Jeff with his sort of daily activities. We have Raymond Burr, who plays Lars Thorwald. He is the next door neighbor who Jeff has taken up a particular interest in watching his day-to-day life. We have Judith Evelyn as Miss Lonely Hearts, another neighbor, Ross Bagdasarian as the songwriter, Georgia Darcy as Miss Torso, Sarah Berner as Frank Caddy, one of the members of the couple that live above the Thorwald, Jesslyn Fax as Miss Hearing Aid, Rand and Harper and Havis Davenport as the newlyweds, and Irene Winston as Miss Anna Thorwald. There's also a small cameo appearance from Alfred Hitchcock, who does this in all of his films, and he makes a quick appearance in the songwriter's apartment during one of his parties. He's near the clock. So the screenplay was written by John Michael Hayes and is based on the short story It Had to Be Murder. The filming of this was shot entirely on a sound stage at Paramount Studios. It's a relatively simple set and design. It doesn't take, it isn't a multiple location thing. Almost the entirety of the film takes place either in Jeff's apartment or from the view of looking out of Jeff's window at the apartment complex. It's not particularly complicated. It would be fairly easy to transition even to a stage play just based on how simple it is. So the set design was actually, they built the entirety of the apartment complex on the sound stage. They also had the apartment complex, once it was built, they had 4 different lighting settings all done interchangeably. They had the morning, the afternoon, the evening, and the nighttime lights all preset, and then they'd swap back and forth. Because this movie all takes place on one set, they were able to interchange scene to scene just by the pre-set lighting cues. They also worked specifically with their sound design so that the sound that takes place within the courtyard sounds as though it's moving through. You know, if a music's being played in one section, the way it echoes through to the other section sounds quite real. So this film in its release made $37.9 million on a $1 million budget. So not too shabby. So that's kind of equivalent to $11 million in today's money, and grossing about $316 million in today's money. So comparatively, that's quite a box office success. So this film once on release, really received almost universal praise from critics. It's considered one of the best movies of all time. I've heard directors like Martin Scorsese cite it as some of their favorite work from other directors. It currently holds 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. And here's something from The Guardian about it. Hitchcock made a career out of indulging our voyeuristic tendencies, and he never excited them more skillfully or with more gleeful self-awareness than in Rear Window. This film was nominated for 4 Academy Awards. It did not win any of them. Best Director for Alfred Hitchcock, Best Adapted Screenplay for John Michael Hayes, Best Cinematography and Color for Robert Burks, and Best Sound Recording for Lauren L. Ryder. Unfortunately, none of them won. In 1997, did was preserved by the National Film Preservation Board. It has been held in the National Film Registry for the Library of Congress, being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The American Film Institute has it as number 42 in 100 movies of all time, number 14 in 100 Years, 100 Thrills, and number 48 in its revision of its I'm going to cut. Rear Window is also referenced a number of times by Taylor Swift. I don't know if I have any Swifties out there, but in her music video for Me, she wears a very similar dress to one that was worn by Grace Kelly in this film. And she also has stated that that her voyeuristic storytelling is inspired by this movie for her album Folklore. I didn't know this. I read this upon Google search. I'm not a Swiftie, but my niece is a Swiftie, so I do come into some Taylor Swift lore. So I thought that was interesting. I know my niece isn't listening because she's like 5, but I have to support my Swiftie gal out there. So I think the biggest theme of this film is, at least the biggest question for me when I watch this film is, who are you when you think no one is watching? This film explores that aspect. Do people behave differently when they think that someone is watching as opposed to how they go on living their normal lives? Sort of that if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? Another major kind of moral question is it okay to meticulously stalk your neighbors if they are in fact doing crime? I think another major theme in this movie that I don't always see talked about is traditional gender roles in relationships. And that's particularly explored through the character of Jeff and Lisa. They are in a relationship that isn't necessarily working in the way that they both want it to based on their own interests and ideas about where they need to be in their lives. Well, guys, should we get into the plot and kind of explore all this? So Rear Window opens, and it opens on a view of all the neighbors of this apartment complex from the point of view of Jeff, our main character's window. It's supposed to be, we're in New York, and it's during an extremely hot heat wave. So all the neighbors have all their windows open, the blinds open, so you can hear and you can see everything. And you get sort of a glimpse of all these neighbors. There's one neighbor that is changing, just sort of course, it's the 50s, so you just sort of see her back. There's one that's, these people have been sleeping out on their deck because it's so hot, so they're gathering their stuff. Some people are getting ready for work, and there's a few things. Then we have Jeff, this is Jimmy Stewart's character. He's chatting on the phone with his boss, and it sort of lays the groundwork of why he is where he is. He's broken his leg, and he's in a wheelchair. And he's been in there for 6 weeks, and he's waiting to kind of get a go-ahead from his doctor to start moving about so he can go back to work. He's feeling extremely stir-crazy where he is. He's used to this big life of adventure. He's a photographic journalist, and he's used to being, it's going through the mud with a Jeep through like the African safari and going all over the world and meeting all kinds of new people and interesting things and going to war zones and all this stuff. And he's stuck in his apartment in a heat wave and can't do anything. And he explains that he's going so crazy that he might even get married. That, he's so bored he might just go out on a whim and get married, even though he doesn't want to. They're sort of joking about how whether or not that would be that would make him more crazy than he already feels. And so as he's kind of talking on the phone, he then hangs up and he kind of rolls over. He's sort of enjoying this like voyeuristic. So after he's off the phone, he sort of wheels over to this window and he's sort of watching his neighbors. And he has sort of a suspicion that this one blonde woman that lives across the street, she loves a lot of attention from men, and she often, in this very voyeuristic way, kind of likes to get changed in front of her window. She likes to dance around in her underwear. He's like very fascinated by this. And he's sort of watching all the different people in the building. He looks down at the bottom of the courtyard, and his one neighbor, Mr. Thorwald, is planting roses. He's got this big, beautiful kind of rose bed that runs all along the courtyard, and another neighbor kind of comes up to him and approaches him to give him a suggestion, and he tells her to shut up and go away. He's immediately irritated, and she kind of goes into her own apartment and closes the door. And as he's doing this, his nurse comes in. His nurse name is Stella, and she's kind of this she's very nurse-like. She's very straight up, very honest. She starts to get into him about a discussion about his girlfriend and what he's going to do about that. The girlfriend's name is Lisa. She really likes him. She thinks he's really good for him. And she's like, you know, like, you need to settle down. You need to get married. This girl's a good one. Like, don't let her go. And he explains that he doesn't think she's the one, because she's too perfect. She's too upper class. She's too, she's got like a socialite. She's wears these very expensive dresses, and she's, wouldn't fit into his sort of like rough and tumble photography life. She wouldn't be able to keep up with him. And if he were to settle down into her lifestyle, he would be absolutely bored out of his mind. And he thinks that maybe he needs somebody more flexible, more down to earth. And Stella, the nurse, just says, don't overthink it, that Lisa loves you, like you would be crazy to let her go. And that's sort of their quick interaction. And then we switch to evening, and Jeff is still by his window, still watching the neighbors. Lisa arrives, and we sort of meet Lisa and sort of see some of the things that Jeff is talking about. They have a discussion about how she never wears the same dress twice. The current dress she has on is $1,100, which is in 1954, which in today's money, if you're curious, is $13,000. And she sells them she's got a store. I don't know if she's got like an actual storefront or she's just a buyer for a different store, but her lifestyle requires her to look a certain way. She's living a life that's extremely kind of materialistic, opposed to, his more adventure lifestyle. She's also, talks a little bit about, she's kind of picking step up, his items that she wants him to replace and get upgraded, like the cigarette box, and how she wants a more simple, more sleek design than the one that he's bought that's engraved. She talks about the importance of things like quiet luxury, which is something that we see a lot when we're talking about, people that are like new rich as opposed to old money. People who are new rich, we think of people like the Kardashians who are like in Balenciaga and flash their brands a lot. Dolce & Gabbana, they're talking about some of that stuff, as opposed to people who have been wealthy for a long time and are wearing designs like Mary-Kate and Ashley Thoreau, which are like just a plain white t-shirt that's like $500 for no reason. So that plain kind of old money. And this is where Lisa comes from, is this sort of old money, quiet luxury. And this is just a world that Jeff either doesn't understand or doesn't want to understand. So these little conversations, although they don't, like what they're actually saying doesn't have a lot of meaning, it's talking about their class differences, and it's showing their differences in the way that they view the world. And so she's talking about these things. She's talking about her day and the designers and stuff, and she's trying to float out this idea that he retires from his photojournalism and gets into fashion photography and for magazines here, so that he won't be traveling around the world, that he can stay in New York and they can be together. He has no interest in this. He refuses. He wants nothing to do with that fashion thing. And she's trying to explain, like, it's not just about the fashion. It's about like me, like I'm here in New York. And he just really isn't hearing it at all. And of course, this is still taking place in front of this window. So Jeff is like half ignoring her, half refusing her while he's paying attention to this window. And Lisa walks away. And so I'll get into the neighbors that he is watching a little bit. We have Miss Lonely Heart. She's at the bottom floor of the apartment complex, is what he calls her. She's a single woman who, is unmarried. She's like, quote unquote, an old maid. So we see her, and she is setting out dinner for two, and they're sort of remarking about, oh, maybe she's got a date tonight. And then they see that she's actually just pretending to have dinner with somebody, and then cries afterwards. We got Miss Torso. That's the ballet dancer that's always changing. And she always has different men over. Always, always, always. There's a songwriter that is sort of at the top floor of the apartment, and he's stuck on this song that he's writing, and he can't seem to get past it. He's got writer's block. There's also a couple that's kind of directly across from Jeff, and that fellow is a jewelry salesman, and his wife is sort of bedridden, or I think they call her infirmed is the word that they use. And so she needs kind of daily care and help, and they are always fighting. On the very top floor above them, there's a couple. They're the one that sleep outside on the balcony when it's hot, just to cool down. And they've got a little dog that's in a basket that they actually lower down into the courtyard, this little Yorkie, and it jumps out of the basket and, does its thing and then gets back in the basket, and they bring it up back through their top window. So then their kind of fight continues, and Lisa really wants him to stay in the city. She's kind of hounding him a little bit, and he tells her to shut up, and he explains all the hardships of his job, all the things that are difficult that she's not going to want to be a part of, that but excite him. Being shot at, being in the jungle, wearing combat boots, no shaving, no showers, unpredictable weather, and you don't know where your next meal is coming from. And he doesn't want her to come with her because he feels like she's too elitist. She needs all these nice fancy things. She can't even deal with like his specific stuff that's here in New York that she's not happy with, let alone in the middle of a jungle. And she doesn't understand that she's not meant for that life. I don't think she's got I do side with Jeff here on this one, that she doesn't understand the world outside of her own particular narrative. And so she's trying to argue with him that she can change and adapt to new things, which I think in some aspects, of course, a person can. But those are just worlds apart. And I don't think she's understanding like the gravity of how different photojournalism in a war zone would be compared to like being a buyer at a brand store, you know? And that she would do anything for him to be together. And this is, I think, mirroring kind of last week's episode almost with Gone with the Wind, with this, the comparison of like Scarlett and Ashley. And it's like you can love someone or love the idea of somebody, but love isn't enough. Love is never enough. Anybody that tells you that love is enough to make a relationship work is like out of their mind. You need much more than love. You need not only connection, but compatibility. And to me, these two feel deeply incompatible. And so they're continuing to fight. And she basically says, like, I don't know what I'm even doing here. Like, we might as well break up. And he said, well, I think we should just keep going until we can't. And she storms out. So then night falls and Jeff falls asleep in his chair, and you hear a woman screaming in the court. You hear a woman screaming that's echoed through the courtyard and glass breaking. And then Jeff is asleep and he's woken up by the rain, and he looks out the window and he sees Thorwald walking out of his apartment with a woman and a suitcase. Then Jeff is kind of coming in and out of sleep through this period. At 2:30 a.m., we see Thorwald return with his suitcase, go into his apartment again, and then leave with the suitcase. And then he returns later still. Thorwald is then seen again leaving his apartment with a woman who is obscured by a large black hat. Then we flip to the daytime, and Stella, the nurse, is back, and they're discussing their neighbors. And Jeff is explaining his suspicious activities of Thorwald from the night before. And Stella kind of dismisses him, and they're watching out the window. And Jeff believes he's looking to see if anyone is watching. They see Thorwald kind of looking out his window. And this kind of raises Jeff's suspicions. They see him wiping and cleaning out the suitcase and wrapping up a knife and a saw. And Jeff begins this like fascination with Thorwald now. And so he busts out binoculars and his like photo camera long lens in order to start watching this guy. And he observes that he doesn't go into his wife's bedroom the entire day, and the shades are up in the living room but down in the bedroom, when most like the previous like interactions we've seen with that apartment building, both sets of blinds have been up. So this is where we start to get into those kind of two main questions of the film. A, how ethical is it to spy on your neighbors? And B, who are you when you think no one's watching? And so that night, Lisa comes back over, and he's now completely let go of this relationship issue that Lisa and him have, because he's hooked and gripped by this, did my neighbor kill his wife? And he's explaining his theories to Lisa as they watch out the window. And she's kind of scared by this. And he sort of states his evidence to Lisa. And, as she's saying, Lisa doesn't believe him. And then Thorwald pulls out the blind as they're watching. And there's a big trunk that he begins to bind with a rope. And Lisa is very unnerved by this. And she's like, okay, like, I believe you. I think something's happening. The next morning, Jeff calls his detective friend, and he'll say he will stop by. Stella comes in, and he's now explained all this to Stella too, and Stella's now invested. Everyone that comes into this apartment is now enthralled with the idea of, did Thorwald, murder his wife? So they're all now watching out of the window. And I think, it does have this like level of suspicion, like you're kind of uneasy, but there's enough evidence back and forth through the whole thing where you're like, did this guy kill his wife? Or are these three people just staring at this poor man through his window? Like, if he doesn't kill his wife, how weird is it that we're like watching this guy live his life? Like, is this any better than being like a peeping Tom through a window? Not really. And so as they're watching, a courier service comes to take the truck away. Stella runs out because she wants to see what the courier truck is. And Stella runs out to see the courier truck names because she wants to see, kind of track any sort of deliveries that might be happening. We also see the dog in the courtyard as Stella's down there digging in the roses, Thorwald's roses, and he shoos them away. So his detective friend then arrives, and Jeff explains all the evidence thus far. The knives, the screaming, the no wife, the rope with a trunk, and the very odd hours in which he was leaving and coming back with the suitcase. The detective thinks this is all very unlikely. That Thorwald, he's too calm. You know, you're watching him, he's too calm. Like, a murderer would be a little more frantic. He says he'll do some digging, but he believes it's very unlikely. So the detective does some digging. He speaks to people around the apartment, and he comes back and he explains that some neighbors saw him Thorwald leaving with a woman that they believed was his wife at 6 a.m., but the neighbors did not know the wife, saying that the superintendent saw Thorwald come back and that they had been living at the apartment for 6 months. The detective found a postcard from Thorwald's wife, Anna, saying that she arrived safe, and Jeff is very dismissive of all this, and he wants the detective to push further and to search for evidence in the apartment. But the detective says, no, I can't do that. There isn't like significant evidence enough that I would need to obtain a search warrant for this. And he refuses to do so. Then we switch to that night, and we're still watching out the window, and this is all done by Jeff's lens point of view shots. So this is all, a good portion of this is all shot through like a telephoto lens. We see Miss Lonely Hearts getting dressed to go out, and she eats at a restaurant across the street alone, so we can kind of switch. There's a gap in the building in the courtyard, and we can see her just directly across the street eating dinner alone. The composer has lots of people over for a party, and he's trying to get through his writer's block. He's playing the same sort of part of his tune over and over again. Miss Torso is practicing her dance moves, and Thorwald comes back from the apartment with a box of laundered clothing. Again, at this point, none of Thorwald's actual actions that we've seen are at all suspicious. Sending a trunk away to your wife who is suspected of traveling, not suspicious. It's just sending her stuff. Laundry, not suspicious. None of these activities, other than him leaving at a very odd hour after a woman's scream was heard, is suspicious. The leaving at an odd hour, yes, suspicious. The scream, yes, suspicious. But are they linked? We have no idea. This is just, we're starting to follow Jeff down his circumstantial evidence rabbit hole, although we haven't had anything concrete to say yes or no either way. Jeff calls the detective and leaves a voice message wanting him to come over. Thorwald makes a call while he's holding his wife's handbag and jewelry, and he lays them out on the clothes, and then he leaves. Lisa then comes over and is watching all this and talking with Jeff, and she says the wife would never leave her purse or her jewelry. No woman goes anywhere without a handbag and jewelry. I go lots of places without a handbag and a jewelry, but this is the 50s, so I'm gonna go with that's probably a little more true. Lisa says she doesn't think that it was the wife leaving the apartment, that it must have been a mistress. The detective comes back and he explains what they explain what they saw, and he dismisses them, and he starts to just like scold them and be like, look, like, you can't spy on your neighbors. Like, this is like kind of criminal activity in and of itself. Like, you're like stalking your neighbors. Like, you need to kind of check your own self. Like, you can't just sit and rot by your window and stare at your neighbors. And so then the detective says this line that I don't love, and he says, I've wasted enough time following leads based on female intuition. And I think this is one of the kind of messages of the film and the representation of like Grace Kelly's character of Lisa is essentially, you know, Jeff's character is painted as like very practical, very logical, and Grace Kelly's character of Lisa is painted as very kind of frivolous and not using logic, not using intuition, kind of a fact versus feelings situation. And that, you know, Grace, like, it's kind of this idea that I've actually read about in Jane Fonda's book, which I really like. Like, Jeff's character likes to expand himself laterally with accomplishments and things and adventure and all this kind of surface stuff, but a continuum of accomplishments. And Grace Kelly wants to work down. She wants to expand herself down. She wants to dig into her emotions, dig into feelings, build intimacy and relationships. And that's where her character is trying to find the fulfillment. And she's trying to find that fulfillment with Jeff, who is a lateral person of fulfillment. And that, I think, is part of their dynamic and part of their difficulty in not seeing eye to eye in their relationship. Anyway, that line, sexist and stupid, because you know what? Women do have an intuition, and 9 times out of 10 is right, and the other time we were just hungry and we weren't sure yet. So the detective continues to look, and he finds the trunk, and that it was only full of clothes, and he tells them to forget about it all, and that the trunk was being picked up by Miss Anna Thorwald. Then we see Miss Lonely Hearts come back with a young man from the restaurant. They're kind of giggling, and he tries to make a move on her, and he gets too aggressive, and it kind of seems like he might assault her, and she gets aggressive and she hits him and she kicks him out of the apartment and falls down crying. And this is where Lisa and Jeff are this is when they start to question their own ethics of what they're doing and watching their neighbors, as they see this scene of, violence, and they go, we weren't supposed to see that. And we weren't supposed to see her crumble down and cry. We shouldn't know this much about Miss Lonely Hearts' love life, that we know that she sets up a dinner for another person who's not there, and that she's now met this young man, and she has all this hope and dreams of this life with 2 people, and only to be completely shut down by this guy that's abusive. And this is where they're really starting to question everything. So later that night, the dog, the little Yorkie that goes down in the basket, is found dead. He's been strangled to death, and the owner comes out and screams and cries at the courtyard. And all the neighbors come out, and she's screaming, who did this? Who did this to my dog? You monster. And the only neighbor that doesn't come out to look is Thorwald. So the following night, Stella, Lisa, and Jeff, who are now glued to this fucking window, are watching Thorwald clean his bathroom walls, and they suspect he might be cleaning up blood from his crimes. And they're looking through all their evidence, all their things, and Jeff is looking at his old photos, and he realizes that the flowers in Thorwald's garden where the dogs were are now shorter than they were 2 weeks ago, which doesn't make any sense. Plants obviously grow upward, and so 2 weeks ago they were here, and now they're here. So they believed that something might be buried under there, and that the dog was killed because he might have found something, or he could smell something that was down there. So Jeff writes a note, what have you done with her, and sends Lisa across the way. And this is where we start to see the evolution of Lisa a little bit. Lisa's starting to dip her toe into some danger, and she likes it. And she slides the note under the door, and she runs out, and Thorwald picks up the note, opens the door, and he just about sees her. She turns the corner. And so we're watching all this, of course, from across the street with Jeff and Stella. Jeff is very impressed by Lisa's bravery. And her and Stella are now kind of hooked and invested, and they want to see what's under those rose bushes. So Jeff, after him reading the note, calls Thorwald and asks him to meet up at a hotel bar. And Thorwald says, I don't know who you are or what you're talking about, because Jeff is now kind of pressing him about his wife. But he does go to this fake meeting at this bar just to get him out of the way. Thorwald, obviously Jeff isn't going. This is not something, he's not going to meet anybody there. There's nobody going. It's just to get him out. And they dig in the rose bushes once he's gone, and they find nothing. And so Lisa then decides to go up the fire escape and go into his apartment. And Stella won't go with her, but she's terrified, and she comes back. We're then back. Stella and Jeff are watching everything that's happening through the window as Lisa's then in that apartment. We look down and we see Miss Lonely Hearts, who's laying out pills. Stella identifies them as sleeping pills. I guess because she's a nurse, she can spot what pills they are from across the courtyard. That seems like maybe she's been a nurse a long time and she really knows. And they believe she might be making a suicide attempt. However, as they're kind of concerned for her, she can kind of hear the music from the songwriter that's had writer's block that sort of made this breakthrough. And she puts the pills down. Lisa's still in the apartment searching for evidence. And Thorwald comes back and he finds Lisa. And he's grabbing her, he's coming towards her, because obviously Lisa's now committed another crime of breaking and entering. And Jeff calls the police and tells them that she's being assaulted. Thorwald grabs Lisa and begins to hurt her, and she calls out for Jeff just as the police arrive. And she stands up, and the police are questioning her because obviously she's being assaulted, but she's also breaking and entering. So there's who's wrong here? If somebody breaks into your home, it's not the same as like hitting someone on the street, you know? And so we're watching this through the window, and Lisa's standing at the window with her back to the window, and she has her hands out and she's pointing to her finger, and she's found Anna Thorwald's wedding ring and she's got it on. And Thorwald sees this, looks down at the ring, looks up at the window to right across his apartment and sees Jeff, and looks right down the barrel of Jeff's camera. Jeff then phones the detective while Stella goes to bail Lisa out of jail. The detective says he'll be right over. And then when he hangs up, a call happens kind of immediately, and he picks it up, and there's silence on the other line. And Jeff realizes that Thorwald has figured it out, that he's whose apartment it is and who he is and who's been watching him. And Jeff is stuck. Like, Jeff doesn't know. Jeff is in a wheelchair. He has to have a nurse come in and take care of him. There's obviously at this point, he can't get out of his apartment. There's like, he's on the bottom level. There's steps up. Like, he's stuck in this one area. Like, he's just sitting duck. Thorwald then breaks in and asks him what he wants and questions why Lisa didn't turn him in. He then attacks Jeff, and Jeff only has his camera bulbs to kind of protect him, and he starts setting off them, like the flash bulbs. And at this time, the police are arriving at Thorwald's apartment, like the detective. And so they see the flash bulbs from across the street, and it kind of signals them. Thorwald then dangles Jeff out of the window, and the police come to arrest him. Thorwald confesses to the murder, and that it was his wife's hand that he had cut off and put in the flower bed that the dog had sniffed out. And it sort of ends with, they in fact did sort of work out this mystery just by watching their neighbors. And then the nice little moment was at the end, Miss Lonely Hearts meets the composer. She goes up to his apartment to tell him how much she likes the song that he's been writing. Because, of course, her hearing that song stopped her from committing suicide. She doesn't tell him that. But it sort of seems like maybe they might spark up a little romance. But yeah, that's the conclusion of Rear Window. It's such a good movie. It's really fun. There's no fat on the movie. Like, the movie has exactly the amount of dialogue it needs to get the job done. It doesn't waste time. Like, once Thorwald, we realize he's the one that's done the murder, the film pretty quickly ends. It's just like very clean, very well shot, not a lot of fat, not a lot of extra sets. You're not wasting time with trick shots. It's a great movie. I highly recommend it. It should be it's definitely on a must-watch list. I hope everyone has had an enjoyable listen and a good week. Please remember to rate and review the podcast. It really helps. Follow me on Instagram, Get Your Popcorn Podcast. Same with TikTok. I'm on Letterboxd. So I'm reviewing those movies, so you can kind of see what's ahead, because I'll definitely put out ratings slightly before the episode drops. And remember, there's also the link in my bio to the Red Cross page if you feel like you're able to donate to relief in the Ukraine. I hope everybody has a really good week, and remember to support Canadian companies when you can. Have a good rest of your day.